In the April of 1885, on the Western Trail, 190 miles south of Dodge City, Kansas, a woman walked into a trail camp on the Red River and asked for the cook's job before anybody had thought to ask her name. The river ran low and red that spring, the crossing churned to a soup of sand and cattle water, and the whole bottom smelled of wet hide and mesquite smoke, and the particular sour green smell of 3,000 head of longhorn cattle held 4 days on the same ground. It was near dark. The outfit's cook had gone down 2 mornings before, with a leg broken by a kicking mule, and had been sent back to Wichita Falls in a hired hack, and 40 men had eaten cold biscuit and burnt beans for 2 days, and were beginning to say so out loud. She came in on foot, out of the South, and the narrator will set down what the men saw, because every one of them told it afterward, and told it the same. She was small and sun-scorched, in a dress gone the color of the road, her shoes tied by their laces over one shoulder, and a stoneware crock held in both arms like a child. She had walked, it came out later, 26 miles in 2 days. There was a split in her lower lip and dust dried into the creases of her knuckles, and she stopped in the light of the cook fire and looked at the man she had correctly picked out as the boss, and did not look at any of the others at all. "I hear you have lost your cook," she said, and her voice carried the soft slur of the west of Ireland worn down by 5 years of Texas. "I can feed 40 men on what you have got in that wagon, and I can do it inside the hour, and I have my own leaven, which is more than your last man had by the taste of what is in that pot." Holt Bannon was 34 years old, and he was the trail boss of that outfit, and he had a great many reasons to say no. He said them to himself in the 4 seconds he took to answer. A woman in a camp of 40 men was a discipline problem and a scandal both. The herd's owner, a syndicate in Fort Worth, would hear of it inside a month and would not like it. There was no separate camp and no woman within 60 miles to travel with her. He had trailed 11 seasons and had never once seen it done. He looked at the crock in her arms and the shoes over her shoulder and the 26 miles on her, and he took his hat off. $30 a month, he said, same as I paid the last man, and he did not have his own leaven. He turned to the wide-shouldered man beside him. "Isham, get her the wagon." Isham Coe was 51 that spring, and he was the segundo of that outfit, and had been for 9 years, and he had come up from Louisiana by way of the 62nd United States Colored Infantry, and 11 years of other men's herds, and he was saving toward a quarter section of his own in Clark County, and told anybody who asked exactly how much he had put by. He looked at his trail boss for a moment with an expression Holt declined to interpret, and then he went and got her the wagon. "There is a thing wants saying first," Holt said, before she had moved. "I am going to say it once, in front of these men, so there is no confusion in anybody about it, and then I will not raise it again." He turned around and pitched his voice to carry to the far side of the fire, where 40 men had stopped pretending not to listen. "This is our cook. She sleeps under that wagon, and the wagon is hers, and no man goes inside the wheels of it for any reason whatever, day or night. She calls, you come. She does not call, you stay where you are. Any man who cannot manage that can draw his wages tonight, and I will not think worse of him for knowing his own limits." He looked at her. "Ma'am, the shotgun in the jockey box is loaded, and it is yours, and if any man here ever gives you cause to reach for it, I would take it as a kindness if you shot him before you troubled to wake me." The men laughed, most of them. 2 did not, and both of those drew their wages inside a fortnight, and Isham Coe saw to it personally that they went quiet. She gave her name as Nora Bracken. She was 22 years old, and she had been widowed at 20, and she had told nobody in Texas her married name in 18 months. They pulled off the Red River the next morning at first light. 3,100 head strung out over 2 miles of new grass, and there was hot sourdough bread at the noon halt for the first time in 3 days. And the narrator would like it understood that in a trail outfit, this is not a small thing. It is very nearly the whole thing. 40 men who had been sullen at the crossing were, by the second night out, competing to bring her firewood. The crock rode wedged in a nest of flour sacks in the belly of the chuck wagon where the jolting could not crack it, and she fed it every morning before she fed anybody, a habit the hands found funny for about a week, and then stopped finding funny at all when they understood she meant it. It had come from her mother's kitchen in County Clare, and had crossed an ocean in a covered bowl in 1880, and had not been let die in 5 years. It is older than any man in this outfit, she told the youngest hand, a boy of 16 named Pinto Vess, when he asked. It was working in my grandmother's crock before the famine. You feed it, and it feeds you, and if you forget it for 4 days it is gone, and no amount of wanting it back will do you the least good. There is a lesson in that, but I will let you find it yourself. She ran that wagon the way a good cook runs one, which is to say she ran the whole outfit, and let Holt Bannon believe he did. Breakfast at 4. The wagon gone ahead of the herd by 6. Noon fire built on ground she picked out of the country herself, having an eye for a camp that Isham said afterward was better than his own. She doctored rope-burned hands, and a boil and Pinto Vess's homesickness, which she treated with extra molasses and no comment at all. And in the 3rd week, 40 miles below the Cimarron, she did the thing that made Holt Bannon start watching her for reasons he could not immediately account for. She came to him at the noon halt and said, "You are meaning to water them at the Alkali Flats tomorrow evening. There is nothing else between here and the river. There is a seep 2 miles east of the trail at the head of a draw with a lone cottonwood standing in it, and it is sweet, and it will water 3,000 head slow if you start them at midday instead of evening." She said it flatly, the way a person states a fact rather than an opinion. Water them at the Alkali, and you will have 40 men and 100 horses purging for 3 days, and you will lose weight off the herd you will not put back on before Dodge. Holt Bannon looked at her for a long moment. "How do you know that?" "Because I have been up this trail before," said Nora Bracken, and picked up her water bucket and walked away, and did not say another word about it for 2 months. He moved the herd east 2 miles the next day. The seep was where she said it was, under a lone cottonwood at the head of a draw, and it ran sweet, and they watered 3,000 head slow through the afternoon, and lost nothing at all. The drive took 11 weeks, and the narrator will not pretend they were eventful, because on a good drive they are not, and their unremarkableness was the whole of their worth. There was a dry storm on the Salt Fork that put the herd on the run for 4 miles, and she had the wagon lashed and coffee going again before the last man came back in at 3 in the morning and handed each of 'em a cup as they came and said nothing at all, which was exactly right. There was an afternoon in the Cherokee Outlet when Holt handed her up onto the wagon seat, and their hands stayed joined about 2 seconds longer than the getting up required, and both let go at the same moment, and she drove the next 4 miles with her jaw set very hard. There was the matter of Dodge City, which came up around the fires the last 2 weeks as it always did, and which Isham Coe cut off flat one night by saying he had delivered cattle to that town 9 years running and had never once been served at the front of a house in it, and that the boys could talk about Dodge all they liked, but would kindly do it somewhere he was not sitting. Nobody argued. Nora put a second helping of cobbler in front of him without being asked, and Isham looked at it a while and then ate it. Holt noticed things and did not say them. He noticed she never sat with her back to open country. He noticed she flinched at a struck match and not at thunder, which told him the trouble that had followed her out of Texas had come with fire in it somewhere. He noticed that she asked him every single day what the wind was doing, and had never once, in 11 weeks, forgotten to ask. And on a night 4 days below Dodge, with the herd bedded and the fire down to coals, Holt Bannon was talking low with Isham Coe about the thing that was eating him, and had been eating him since November, which was Bluff Creek. 3 years of drought, and my father's notion of improvement, he said. There is not a live spring on the whole of that range. It waters off Bluff Creek, and Bluff Creek quit running in August of '83, and has quit every August since. There is exactly 1 year-round spring in Clark County, and it is on a quarter section somebody filed on Sand Creek in '82, and never proved out and never worked, and the county says the man is dead and nobody can find his widow, and I have wrote to the land office twice. Nora Bracken, standing 8 feet behind him with the coffee pot in her hand, went absolutely still. She did not make a sound. She did not spill a drop. But Isham Coe was facing her across that fire, and Isham Coe saw the whole of it happen in her face, and closed his mouth on whatever he had been about to say, and looked into the coals, and did not tell his trail boss one word about it for 11 weeks. Before that outfit came up on Dodge City, and it did, 4 days later, with the whole town's dust on the horizon by noon, there were 4 more quiet nights on the trail, with sourdough rising in a crock 100 years old and 40 men who had come to think of the chuck wagon as the best part of the drive. If you have stayed with this story this far, stay a little longer. What comes next is the part that changes everything. And if you find yourself moved by tales of love that survived the worst the West could throw at them, the bell beneath this story is how we keep meeting like this. They delivered 3,081 head at Dodge City on the 14th of July, 1885, having lost 19 on the trail, which was a very good drive, and Holt Bannon drew his wages and his delivery bonus, and stood in the stock pens with $1,000 against a mortgage of $6,400, and understood exactly how far short he had come. 2 things were waiting for him in that town. The first was Adeline Prentice, 6 and 20, the only daughter of Ellis Prentice, who bought cattle in Dodge and lent money in Clark County, and held the paper on Bluff Creek. She had been told by her father, and had told herself rather more often, that she would be the woman at Bluff Creek, and she came down to the pens in a good gray traveling dress to meet the herd, and she was pleasant to Nora Bracken for about 90 seconds, which was as long as it took her to understand what she was looking at. The second was a handbill nailed to the post outside the Long Branch, offering $50 for information as to the whereabouts of one Nora Torrance, widow, late of Wichita County, Texas, and it was signed J. Torrance. Judd Torrance was 38, and he was her husband's elder brother, and he had been hunting her for 18 months, and he found the outfit's camp on the flats north of the river on the second evening. "There is a woman cooking for you," he said, sitting his horse at the edge of the firelight. "Small, Irish, I have got a claim on her." Holt Bannon set down the plate he was holding and stood up. "You have got a claim on a woman." "My brother's widow. She run off with paper that belongs to the family, and I mean to have it back. And I will pay the $50 to any man here who tells me which wagon she sleeps under." Judd Torrance looked past him at the fire, at the 40 men who had stopped eating. Come on, then. $50 is 2 months' wages. Nobody said anything at all. Ain't seen nobody, said Holt Bannon. You are lying to me. I am telling you what is on my ground and what ain't, and I have been telling men that for 11 seasons, and never once been asked twice. He did not raise his voice, which is what men from that country do in place of shouting. Now you are going to turn that horse and ride off my camp, and if I see you inside a mile of this wagon again, I will not be as sociable about it. Judd Torrance rode. It took him some time, and there was talk in it, and Isham Coe walked out 40 yards behind him with a rifle in the crook of his arm to see that the talk did not become anything else. Nora had heard all of it from inside the wheels of the wagon. She did not thank him. She got up at 2:30 the next morning instead of 4, and made a proper going-home breakfast for 40 men out of the last of the Dodge City supplies. Dried apple pies, 3 of them, the pastry cut with a tin cup, and left the third one whole on the seat of Holt Bannon's saddle where he would find it at daylight, and said nothing about that either. They came on to Bluff Creek in the first week of August. The outfit paid off and scattered, and only Holt and Isham and Nora and the boy Pinto Vess going down the last 20 miles together, because Holt had offered her the winter's cooking at the ranch, and she had said yes before he had finished the sentence. The country there was limestone breaks and short buffalo grass gone the color of a line in August, with the creek bed running white and dry between banks of cottonwood that had begun, in the 3rd year of that drought, to lose their crowns. The house was low and long, and built of native stone, a good house, and it stood on a rise looking out over 11,000 acres of range that had no water on it at all. He put her in the house with the bar on the door, and moved himself out to the bunkhouse with Isham, and said so in front of both men, and did not raise it again. She told him her truth on the last Sunday in September, on the dry bed of Bluff Creek, sitting on a slab of fallen limestone with the sun going down red through the smoke of somebody's stubble fire 40 miles off. My name is Nora Torrance, she said. It was Bracken in Clare, and it will be Bracken on a payroll for the rest of my life. But it is Torrance on a marriage line in Wichita County, and on a patent to 160 acres on Sand Creek that my husband filed in '82. Holt Bannon did not move at all. Wesley Torrance, she said, 25, and a good man who was not careful, and I was 19 and knew nothing at all. He filed on that quarter for the spring on it. He said a spring in this country was worth more than gold, and he was right, and he never lived to do one thing about it. She was looking at the dry creek. In the October of '83, a fire came up out of the south on a 40-mile wind. Wesley had 110 acres of grass he had cut and stacked, and he would not leave it. I told him to fire the grass ahead of it, backfire it, burn a black strip, and let the big fire come into it and starve. My father did it twice in Clare on furs. I stood in that yard and I told him, and he told me to get in the wagon and go. And I went, because I was 19 and he was my husband. Her voice did not break, which was worse. He was still trying to wet the stacks. There was nothing left of any of it. I was 20 years old and a widow inside of 4 hours, and I have never in my life been able to decide whether I should have got out of that wagon. The narrator will set down that Holt Bannon did not say a single one of the useless things a man says at such a moment. He sat where he was and let her finish. Judd wants the spring, she said. He has wanted it since the funeral. He put it to me at the graveside, Holt, at the graveside, that a woman alone had no business with a patent, and I should sign it over to the family and go home to Ireland. I have been 18 months walking away from that man with a crock and a marriage line and a patent sewed into the hem of a dress. And I have cooked for 2 outfits under my mother's name, and 4 nights below the Cimarron I heard you tell Isham Co. you had wrote twice to the land office looking for me. Why did you not say so? Because I had known you 11 weeks, and I have learned what a spring is worth to a man in this county, said Nora Torrance, and because I wanted, for one summer of my life, to be a woman somebody was glad to see coming with a coffee pot, and not a woman with 160 acres of water on her. Holt was quiet a long moment. My father died in November, he said. He left me 11,000 acres, $6,400 of mortgage to Ellis Prentice, and a considered opinion, which he was good enough to put in writing, that I would lose the whole of it inside 2 years. That is the wound, if you are asking after mine. Not that he was cruel, that he might turn out to be right. He looked out at the dry creek. I have spent 11 months trying to prove a dead man wrong, and I have got $1,000 in 4 months. She reached over and put her hand on his, on the limestone, which was the first time either of them had touched the other on purpose. What passed between them then was brief, and it was the first kiss either of them had known in a long while, and what broke open in her was not longing, but the plain, unbearable relief of being known entire by a man who had just been handed every reason to want her for something else, and had not once reached for it. He did not tell her about the other clause in his father's will. He had 4 months to do it, and he told himself that night and 11 nights after that he would find the right hour for it. Adeline Prentice found the hour first. She came out to Bluff Creek on the 9th of October with her father's buggy and her father's lawyer's knowledge, and she waited until Isham and Holt were both in the yard and Pinto Vess was holding the horses, and then she said it to Nora on the porch step, pleasantly, at an ordinary volume, the way such things are always said. You will forgive me, Mrs. Torrance. It is Torrance, I understand, whatever the payroll says, but I do not think anyone has been honest with you, and I find I cannot go on watching it. Josiah Bannon's will requires his son to be married and settled by the 1st day of December of this year, being his 35th birthday, or the whole of Bluff Creek and $9,000 of residue passes to a cousin in Missouri. She adjusted her gloves. My father's man drew the will. It has been the talk of this county since November. His Grace of the chuck wagon has needed a wife by winter for 11 months, and he came home from the trail with one, and she happens to own the only live water in Clark County. I do think you were entitled to know the arithmetic. The narrator will not pretend it was not effective. It was very nearly perfect. Every kindness of 11 weeks and 2 months went through Nora Torrance's mind in about 4 seconds, and came out the other side wearing a different face, and there was not one single thing Holt Bannon could say in that yard, in front of witnesses, that would not sound exactly like a man caught out. He said the true thing anyway, which was, I should have told you in September. I had it in my mouth twice, and I could not get it said, because I knew it would come out sounding like this. It does sound like this, Nora said. She rode out that afternoon to the Sand Creek quarter, 11 miles east, where there was a fallen ensoddy and a spring running out of a limestone ledge at 4 gallons a minute in the 3rd year of a drought, and she stayed there 4 days, and Holt Bannon did not follow her, which was the only correct thing available to him and cost him a great deal. Judd Torrance came on the 5th day, which was the 14th of October, and he did not come alone, and he did not come to talk. He came with 2 men and a can of coal oil at 3 in the afternoon on a day with a 40-mile wind out of the south, and he fired the grass a mile below the Sand Creek quarter in 8 places. because a quarter section with the grass burnt off it and the soddy gone and the widow burnt out of the county was a quarter section a family could file a contest on, and because he had learned in 18 months that she would not sign. Holt Bannon and Isham Coe saw the smoke from the Bluff Creek rise at 3:20 and came 11 miles at a dead run. The narrator has heard 3 tellings of the next 2 hours and sets down only what the county afterward agreed on. That the fire came up that draw on a 40-mile wind with a head on it 40 feet high. That Holt Bannon reached the soddy first and got the 2 horses out of the pen and was caught by a roll of it coming through the cottonwoods and went down with his left arm and shoulder and the side of his head burned and his hair gone. That Nora Torrance dragged him by his good arm into the wet ground below the spring ledge and put her own soaked apron over his face, and that she then got up out of that mud in front of Isham Coe and lit the grass. She fired a strip 400 yards long across the head of the draw with a stick of burning cottonwood, walking backward into her own wind, working east to west the way her father had done it on furs in County Clare, and she let it burn north away from her, and when the big fire came into the black it starved and lay down and went out along a line you could still see from the ridge 9 years later. Then she went back down into the mud and held his head out of the water until Isham Coe brought the wagon. Judd Torrance and one of his men were taken up on the Ashland Road at 8 that evening by the sheriff of Clark County on the evidence of the third man, who had thought better of the business somewhere around the time the wind turned, and of a coal oil can with a Dodge City Mercantile stamp on it charged to an account in Adeline Prentice's own name, which was the part her father could not talk his way past. Judd went to the state penitentiary at Lansing for 11 years. Adeline Prentice was not prosecuted, there being no law then against buying a man his coal oil, and she left Clark County for her mother's people in Ohio in the spring and did not come back, and her father sold his interest in Dodge inside 2 years. Holt Bannon lost his left arm below the elbow in the last week of October and lay in a stone house at Bluff Creek through November with Nora Torrance sitting up with him 9 nights running, and the first day of December came and went and he was not married. He let it go. That is the whole of it. He had a marriage line and a willing woman and a $9,000 residue 11 days away, and Nora Torrance said no. Not before the first, she said, standing at the foot of that bed with her arms folded. Not for $9,000 and not for 11,000 acres. If I marry you in November, there is not a soul in this county, and there is not a voice in my own head at 4 a.m. that will ever be able to say, I was not the condition in a dead man's will. You will lose it, Holt. You will lose the whole of it, and I am sorry. And then you will have nothing at all, and then you may ask me again. He asked her again on the 4th of December, sitting up with one arm, having lost 11,000 acres and a house and $9,000 3 days earlier. She said yes before he had finished the sentence. They were married at the Ashland Church on the 21st of December, 1885, and moved on to 160 acres on Sand Creek that stood in her name and stayed in her name for the whole of her life, because he never once asked her to change it, and she never once offered. The narrator will be plain about the years that followed, because they were not easy. They began with a spring, a fallen soddy 41 head Holt had held back out of the wreck, and a one-armed man learning to rope again at 5 and 30, which took him 2 years and a great deal more profanity than his wife pretended not to hear. Isham Coe filed on the adjoining quarter in the March of 1886 with 11 years of saved wages, and ran his cattle with theirs on shares for 19 years. Bluff Creek went to Prentice's bank, and from the bank to a syndicate in Kansas City, and in the drought of 1887 it blew out entirely, having no live water on it, and by 1890 there was nothing on that range but a stone house with the windows out. The Bannon outfit on Sand Creek ran 1,100 head that same year off 4 gallons a minute. Their daughter was born in 1887, and their sons in 1889 and 1893, and the eldest learned to feed the crock before she learned to read, which was the arrangement in that kitchen, and was not negotiable. For it sat on the same shelf in the same house for 51 years, a stoneware crock out of County Clare that had crossed an ocean in a covered bowl and 11 weeks of the Western Trail in a nest of flour sacks, and Nora Bannon fed it every morning of her life before she fed anybody, and her daughter after her. And there are people in Clark County, Kansas, today who bake with a starter that came out of that crock and can tell you, if you ask them, exactly how it got there. They asked her once, at a church supper in her old age, what the secret of it was. "There is no secret in it at all," said Nora Bannon. "You feed it every day whether you want the bread or not. That is the entire trick, and it works on very nearly everything. If your heart has ever leaned toward a story where love arrived quiet and stayed long enough to change everything, then this story was for you." Out on the short grass country of southwestern Kansas, where the wind keeps the only memory of what was, the love between Holt Bannon and Nora Torrance became the kind that does not need anybody to remember it to be real. Though 40 cowboys remembered it, every one of them, for the rest of their lives, and never once got through the telling without mentioning the bread. If stories of frontier love that endured through hardship, prejudice, and the kind of silence only the West knows speak to you, follow the lonesome trail for more. Here, the love stories are quiet, the courage is real, and the last word is always worth the wait. Until the next trail,